Present the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Thanks there, Nighthawk. You're back with Dave and Becky's Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio, the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button and also subscribe to the archives. They're for free. And get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. You can get a t-shirt, a mug, or anything, and all the artwork is done by A Mad Painter. He's another host on Revolution Radio. And if you don't know, the website is revolution.radio. I'm going to thank you very much for listening to Revolution Radio. And we are halfway through show number 666.
660 and 600.
Yeah, and I knew you would do that too, by the way, just letting you know. Now, for everyone, this is Human Medical Experiments Part 5. That means there's 4 other parts for you to catch up on. And today we'll be starting in the 1950s. Meki, your rundown.
Look, we've been discussing, and I need to say before we start here that the information may contain graphic and upsetting material. Obviously, we're not going to show any pictures, but the text alone is enough to be upsetting, in my opinion. We've looked at medical experiments. We looked at the obligation the medical establishment has toward the rest of humanity to, well, essentially do no harm, really, right? As in the Hippocratic Oath and the other oaths that are being taken by various different medical professionals all over the world, because you must have trust in your medical establishment. You must. If you don't have trust in it, then all sort of falls apart. And of course, it is not symptomatic. It is not. It is, in my opinion, a few that have taken liberties that are completely beyond the pale when it comes to the safety and the consent of their charges. You can't always say patients because they weren't always patients, but they were people in their care or people they had access to. And in some instances, I think they believed they were either experimenting on lesser human beings or on creatures they didn't really deem human in its full capacity, right? And I'm thinking here of course of Nazi Germany, which had done a great deal to dehumanize the Jews. I'm also thinking here of people that were experimented on from other races, usually people that were considered to be more primitive than the people that did the experiments. So there was a certain, I guess, a step change, a certain distinction made that said, "Oh, you're not really human." Now that was never really fully said that way, but I think the experimenters' minds, something like that went on, where they thought, "Oh, you're not really fully human, so I can do this. I mean, you're human enough for me to create some valuable research, but not human enough to really care about what happens to you." And we see this also from the point of view as to within their own race, who the people were that they targeted, and usually they were the poor or the mentally handicapped. In either case, or orphans, which is worse yet. But it was people that had no agency of their own. They had no power over their lives, and they were brutally taken advantage of to the point of death, in fact, which is a horrible, horrible thing. And we will discuss it again at the end of the show cycle. We did put it up front because it made sense to just think about that while you hear the information. But we'll talk about it again after you've heard all of the information. And I do apologize, but this is a long show cycle. There's a lot of information. But we will discuss whether or not you should, in fact, use the information, the research that you gathered. Because the truth is this, some of it is extremely valuable from a purely scientific medical point of view. It is, right? And how you got to it, it doesn't really take away from the potential validity of the information. I mean, other studies were just cruel and unnecessary. I mean, the Tuskegee experiment was clearly, it ran too long. It was just nonsense at the end, because we knew that penicillin did it. It cured syphilis. We knew that. You no longer have to run it for 10, 20, 30 years. You don't have to. You can treat the people now, right?
But in that experiment, for everyone listening, if you're catching this for the first time, the patients were not given any penicillin to fix it.
No, correct. Even though we knew by the time the experiment had run for a few years that penicillin would be the thing. But if you do take the information, you do take the research, and you do use it, you're condoning, even if you're not saying so, but you are condoning the methods with which the information was obtained. You are. You're saying, okay, and this is, I mean, the argument would be, it's happened already. There's nothing we can do for the victims now. We might as well use the information. And it's a pure utilitarian argument, and we could say, yeah, well, that makes sense. However, by doing that, you're giving license to future researchers.
Yeah.
To do the same. Because, I mean, a lot of them did want to, glean or obtain some insights, obtain some information, some research that could, further their craft, further medical, treatments, etc., etc. And in the future, they can say, well, I know what I'm doing is wrong, let's say, for argument's sake, but I know it'll be used. I know it'll be used because it's useful. So it's a double-edged sword. So you're saying, yeah, well, the people have already suffered. They've already lived through it or died from it. So we have the information, and there was a certain amount of sacrifice to get it. To not use it would make that sacrifice, be it voluntary or otherwise, an even greater waste. But are you giving license to the future to do things like that again? Okay, this is the question you have to ask yourself. And there's no easy answer. I can say to you, from a moral, ethical point of view, it's easy to say, no, we cannot use any of it. But what if? And this is a completely hypothetical. Let's say, the Nazi scientists had done these studies, and some of their research leads to the cure for cancer, for argument's sake, right? Now, no, it hasn't happened, but let's say it would. Let's say it does happen one day. Does it then make it okay? It's no longer an easy answer, is it?
No, that's right.
To do I save the tens of millions that are dying from cancer, or will I honor the memory of the people that were tortured in order to obtain that knowledge?
Oh, look,
it's like the ultimate.
I'll just add to it. We believed in the same vein that animals didn't have emotions or feelings, and that enabled us as humans to do experiments on them for, how allergic is some new beauty product. Isn't that insane? But from a science perspective, that was all that was required to be justified enough to be able to enable that experiment to take place, and the results are still there. We took a while longer because we still, apex predators, who cares, right? Whatever. And animal activists got up the scientific community and decided to have that turned around so that now we do understand that it's a thing. From the human perspective, we got there a lot quicker, and we still ignored all of the other facts. Now we're finding out that plants communicate to each other. And look, it is a matter of scale and time. To us, plants live very slow lives, but they live lives nonetheless. And they are communicating through very complex networks
it's really interesting. They share water. They keep out intruders. They have feelings, and if you're familiar with Kirlian photography,
yes,
which is photography that captures
auras.
That the plants have as much of an aura as any animal, including
what about
ourselves,
that,
of course.
that smart fungus?
Yeah, absolutely.
That re-engineered the Japanese subway system. They used it with the same points of contact and the distances in order to make a more efficient subway system. That's amazing.
We're going to nature for look at any of the groundbreaking designs, and Dave just pointed one out. But look at any groundbreaking designs of anything we do. Look at the shapes, and then ask yourself where did they come from.
Who do we copy?
Or the networks that exist, neural networks, etc.
That's right.
The truth of it is very simply, nature. I want to boil it down to a very simple question, then we'll get into the text. There's a very simple moral dilemma question that if you've gone to uni and done any kind of philosophy or psychology or anything like that, you would have come across. And it's this, even in the religious studies. And this is really the crux of morality, be it religious or otherwise. And this is up to you. You are now making the decision as an individual. It's not a group of you. It's not a nation, a country. It's you as an individual are being asked this question. You, Dave, or you, Bob, or whoever, or me, Mackie, right? In order to secure happiness, eternal happiness, prosperity, health, all good things for all human beings, all you have to do is torture to death a small child.
Oh, God.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that.
But you have to do it.
Yeah. I'll pass.
Okay? Not someone, because it goes hand in hand with this question. People were asked in the street, how much of a road toll do you think is acceptable? Road toll meaning how many people do you think is acceptable to have killed in the street?
How many lives lost on your roads? That's right.
Yeah, 100, 500, 1,000, 2, 50, whatever. Like, what is the number that you could live with? What is the number that you would go, okay, well, I guess that's, we've done it, we've done enough. That's enough. Is 50 the right number? Is 20 people killed on the road?
I'll be the recipient. I'll be the person being questioned. I'll just say, 25 a year.
25, right.
Uh-huh.
So people would say different things. Dave said 25. Other people might say different numbers. It doesn't really matter what the number is, they say. The next thing that would happen, and this actually happened.
I love the follow-up.
It was an experiment that was conducted.
Yeah.
They brought in 25 people of that person's family and friends.
Yeah.
So these are the people that will get killed. So what is your answer now?
0.
None. And that was the same every single time.
I love those thought experiments.
Because if it's abstract, we don't care. Kill that guy, kill this guy. It's a number. 6 million, people starve to death every year. It's a number. I don't care. Million people were killed. Million soldiers were killed, both Ukrainian and Russian, since the war began. It's a number. That's how Putin thinks about it. 800,000 of his own people. It's a number. As soon as you make it personally relevant to the person being questioned, the answer changes. It is no longer abstract. And this is really where we are here. If one of the people that had been tortured to death with these experiments was one of your ancestors, how would you feel about that? What if it was your children?
I don't think you would.
What if it was you?
Right? If it was one of your ancestors that led to your birth, then you probably wouldn't. So,
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, these are not. They seem easy answers. Oh, it was obtained, using horrific methods, abusing and killing people without their consent, etc., etc. So we should never use it. What if it cures cancer?
Yeah.
What if it cures the cancer of your child? What if it cures the cancer of your wife or husband? What if it cures the cancer of your
then you would allow it.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Or would you?
This is the problem. You would.
Yeah. But see, we should not be in a position to ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
This should never have happened. This should never have happened, but it did, right? And now that we are there, but it should never happen again. But I can tell you it will.
That's right.
Absolutely it will.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably happening right now.
Right now. And tomorrow.
Yeah. Sorry, that was sort of my rundown, Dave. You wanna take it?
Yeah, you can do that
because
first Latin translation for
Oh,
me.
I'll do it. Okay, no worries. So we're now in the 1950s, and this is specifically the United States we're in now, which had the most entries. I'm sorry to say. In 1950, to conduct a simulation of a biological warfare attack, the U.S. Navy sprayed large quantities of the bacterium Serratia marascens, considered harmless at the time, over the city of San Francisco during a project called Operation Sea Spray. Numerous citizens contracted pneumonia-like illnesses, and at least one person died as a result. The family of the person who died sued the government for gross negligence, but a federal judge ruled in favor of the government in 1981. Serratia tests were continued until at least 1969. Also in 1950, Dr. Joseph Stokes of the University of Pennsylvania deliberately infected 200 female prisoners with viral hepatitis. From the 1950s, yes, bad, to 1972, mentally disabled children at the Willbrook State School in Staten Island, New York, were intentionally infected with viral hepatitis for research whose purpose was to help to discover a vaccine. From 1963 to 1966, Saul Krugman of New York University promised the parents of mentally disabled children that their children would be enrolled into Willowbrook in exchange for signing a consent form for procedures that he claimed were vaccinations. In reality, the procedures involved deliberately infecting children with viral hepatitis by feeding them an extract made from the feces of patients infected with the disease. Dave.
Human centipede. In 1952, Chester M. Southam, a Sloan Kettering Institute researcher, injected live cancer cells known as HeLa, capital H, capital L, HeLa cells into prisoners at the Ohio State Penitentiary and cancer patients, also at Sloan Kettering. 300 healthy females were injected with live cancer cells without being told. The doctors stated that they knew at the time that it might cause cancer. Wow. In 1953, Dr. Frank Olson and several other colleagues were unknowingly dosed with LSD as part of the CIA experiment MK-Ultra. Olson died 9 days later after falling to his death from a hotel window under suspicious circumstances. I can tell you that the chemical of LSD at that point was LSD-25. The San Francisco Chronicle, December 17th, 1975, page 5, reported a claim by the Church of Scientology that the CIA conducted an open-air biological warfare experiment in 1955 near Tampa, Florida, and elsewhere in Florida with whooping cough bacteria. It was alleged that the experiment tripled the whooping cough infections in Florida to over 1,000 cases and caused whooping cough deaths in the state to increase from 1 to 12 over the previous year. This claim had been cited in a number of later sources, although these added no further supporting evidence. During the 1950s, the United States conducted a series of field tests using entomological weapons, or EWs. Operation Big Itch, I'm getting itchy just thinking about it, in 1954 was designed to test munitions loaded with infected fleas. Xenocilla Cheops. In May 1955, over 300,000 uninfected mosquitoes were dropped over parts of the US. State of Georgia, to determine if the air-dropped mosquitoes could survive to take meals from humans. The mosquito tests were known as Operation Big Buzz. The US engaged in at least 2 other EW testing programs named Operation Dropkick and Operation Mayday.
It's good to know the government would never do you any harm. Which brings us to the 1960s. In 1963, 22 elderly, this time patients at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, were injected with liver cancer cells by Chester M. Southern.
Live cancer.
Live cancer, not liver cancer. Live cancer cells by Chester M. Southern, who in 1952 had done the same to prisoners at the Ohio State Prison, as we said earlier, to discover the secret of how healthy bodies fight the invasion of malignant cells. The administration of the hospital attempted to cover the study up, but the New York Medical Licensing Board ultimately placed Southern on probation for 1 year. 2 years later, the American Cancer Society elected him as their vice president.
Good Lord.
From 1963 to 1974, as part of Project Shipboard Hazard and Defense, SHAD, the U.S. Army performed tests which involved spraying several U.S. ships with various biological and chemical warfare agents, while thousands of U.S. military personnel were aboard the ships. The personnel were not notified of the tests and were not given any protective clothing. Chemicals tested on the U.S. military personnel included the nerve gases XV and sarin, toxic chemicals such as zinc, cadmium sulfide, and sulfur dioxide, and a variety of biological agents, including Bacillus globigi, Coxiella burnetii, the causative agent of Q fever, and Francisella tularensis, the causative agent of tularemia. In 1966, the U.S. Army released Bacillus globigi into the tunnels of the New York City subway system as part of a field experiment called A Study of the Vulnerability of Subway Passengers in New York City to Covert Attacks with Biological Agents. The Chicago subway system was also subject to a similar experiment by the Army. I mean, that name of the study doesn't leave anything to the imagination.
No, they just called it what it was. That's really funny. They didn't call it Big Sneeze or anything like that, which would have matched the prior descriptions. Human radiation experiments. Researchers in the United States have performed thousands of human radiation experiments to determine the effects of ionizing radiation and radioactive contamination on the human body, generally on people who were poor, sick, or powerless. Most of these tests were performed, funded, or supervised by the United States military, the Atomic Energy Commission, or various other US federal government agencies. The experiments included a wide array of studies such as feeding radioactive food to mentally disabled children or conscientious objectors. Wow. Inserting radium rods into the noses of children, deliberately releasing radioactive chemicals over US and Canadian cities, measuring the health effects of radioactive fallout from nuclear bomb tests, injecting pregnant women and babies with radioactive chemicals, and irradiating the testicles of prison inmates, amongst other things. Much information about these programs was classified and kept secret. In 1986, the United States House Committee on Energy and Commerce released a report entitled American Nuclear Guinea Pigs: 3 Decades of Radiation Experiments on US Citizens. In the 1990s, Eileen Wellsom's reports on radiation testing for the Albuquerque Tribune prompted the creation of the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments by executive order of the President, Bill Clinton, to monitor the government tests, to monitor them. That's hilarious. It published the results in 1995. Wellsom later wrote a book called The Plutonium Files.
I want you to really take this in, because people always say, oh, the government would never do this and the government would never do that. The government is just people, and people will pretty much do anything they can get away with. Okay? So please.
Yeah. You know that the nuclear tests of the captured ships after World War II where they set them up in varying distances away around an epicenter and did
Oh,
an
yeah,
underground radiation test, underwater test, nuclear explosion, and it sent the water hundreds of meters in the air, and all of those people were irradiated. Animals were irradiated. There was sheep and goats and pigs and everything as usual in American testing for that. But the shipmates who had to go on and collect all of these, they were just wearing shorts. Shorts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they, will wash you down. It's all good, right? It doesn't matter. So yes, all the same. Just crazy. Who thought that this was even a thing? You trust your government to, stay out of your business, and here we are.
It makes you wonder. I know, look, there's a lot more, but it makes you wonder about what goes on in the minds of the people that do this, because it doesn't just happen. It's not like all of a sudden, these events happen. It's just some kind of accident or a cosmic joke. These are planned out, in fact, well planned out, one would think. Undertakings, experiments, research assignments, and that had to originate somewhere. And someone had to actually sit down and think about it. How are we going to do this? Who are going to be the test subjects? And always, of course, it's the people that have the least defense, either from society or themselves.
There would have been a room full of people, Mickey, and sign off on it.
Well, if you're involved, look, a lot of scientists, not a lot, but the scientists who actually experiment on themselves, right? That's probably not a good idea, but I get it, right? Or you get volunteers. There are programs where people ask volunteers. At uni, for example, part of my grade in psychology was to be part of experiments. Now, they didn't involve eating anything or being injected with anything, but like taking tests or being part of a study group or whatever, right?
May cause.
I know one was me going out to an amusement arcade and playing on the computer games, and then going to the pokies and playing there and describing what I feel and how I feel, etc., etc.
Okay.
Right? But that's with consent, informed consent, and you know what you're doing, right? None of these people that we're talking about here were told any of this, and in some cases they wouldn't even have understood it, and their guardians weren't told about this either. In some cases, the guardians, being the government, for orphans and such, were the perpetrators of this. And do you know what the funny thing is, Dave? As far as I know, nobody was ever, prosecuted for any of this. No, really. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
In fact, the Nazis, as we outlined last week, the Nazis used some of the experiments that had happened in the States in their defense. The Nazi scientists just say, you're okay, you're accusing me of this, but look, this is what you did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same. In any meaningful way, it's the same. Of course, that didn't work, because what you do when it's wrong is much worse than what I do when it's wrong. Obviously, right? Which brings us to radioactive iodine experiments, which let me just share the information. Again, it's upsetting. Please be aware. In a 1949 operation called the Green Run, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, released iodine-131 and xenon-133 into the atmosphere near the Hanford site in Washington, which contaminated a 500,000 acre or 2,000 square kilometer area containing 3 small towns. In 1953, the AEC ran several studies at the University of Iowa on the health effects of radioactive iodine in newborns and pregnant women. In one study, researchers gave pregnant women between 100 and 200 microcuries, which is a quantity of radiation, of iodine-131, and later performed abortions to study the women's embryos in an attempt to discover at what stage and to what extent radioactive iodine crosses the placental barrier. In another study, they gave 25 newborn babies who were under 36 hours old and weighed from 5.5 to 8.5 pounds, or 2.5 to 3.9 kilos, iodine-131, either by oral administration or through an injection, so that it could measure the amount of iodine in their thyroid glands as iodine would go to that gland. In another AEC study, researchers at the University of Nebraska College of Medicine fed iodine-131 to 28 healthy infants through a gastric tube to test the concentration of iodine in the infant's thyroid glands. In 1953, the AEC sponsored a study to discover if radioactive iodine affected premature babies differently from full-term babies. In the experiment, researchers from Harper Hospital in Detroit orally administered iodine-131 to 65 premature and full-term infants who weighed from 2.1 to 5.5 pounds, or 0.95 to 2.49 kilograms. In Alaska, starting in August 1955, the AEC selected a total of 102 Inuit, or as you would call them, Eskimos, natives, and Athapascan indigenous peoples who would be used to study the effects of radioactive iodine on thyroid tissue, particularly in cold environments. Over a 2-year span, the test subjects were given doses of I-131 and samples of saliva, urine, blood, and thyroid tissue were collected from them. The purpose and risks of the radioactive iodine dosing, along with the collection of body fluid and tissue samples, were not explained to the test subjects, and the AEC did not conduct any follow-up studies to monitor for long-term health effects. In an experiment in the 1960s, over 100 Alaskan citizens were continually exposed to radioactive iodine. In 1962, the Hanford site again released I-131, stationing test subjects along its path to record its effect on them. The AEC also recruited Hanford volunteers to ingest milk contaminated with I-131 during this.
It's so appalling to think. Oh, we're just curious. Let's see what happens. You know, I know that in the US that the nuclear test at Area 51, the downstream fallout areas were known and mapped, and people were tested on the QT, on the quiet, secretly. So, uranium experiments. It is desired that no document be released in which refers to experiments with humans and might have adverse effect on public opinion or result in legal suits. Documents covering such work should be classified secret. So we're doing it, just don't let anyone know it. If you, hey, stop it. In April 17, 1947, Atomic Energy Commission memo from Colonel O.G. Hayward Jr. to Dr. Fiedler at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee between 1946 and 47. Researchers at the University of Rochester injected uranium-234 and uranium-235 in dosages ranging from 6.4 to 70.7 micrograms per kilogram of body weight into 6 people to study how much uranium their kidneys could tolerate before becoming damaged. Between 1953 and 1957, at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. William Sweet injected 11 terminally ill, comatose, and semi-comatose patients with uranium in an experiment to determine, among other things, its viability as a chemotherapy treatment against brain tumors, which all but one of the patients had, one being a misdiagnosis. Sweet, who died in 2001, maintained that consent had been obtained from the patients and next of kin. Just remembering that these were terminally ill, comatose and semi-comatose. So that would have had power of attorney for those other people to be able to sign it off.
Oh,
so
look,
they claim.
Absolutely. So they claim. You put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. That's funny.
That's what I do.
No, but it's funny how in English that really matters. Anyway, plutonium experiments, because because clearly plutonium being so different from uranium, we have to test that as well. No. you have radioactive material. You know it's not going to be good for you. You're not going to sprinkle over your cornflakes in the morning, are you? Seriously.
Not today.
Maybe you can read your book at night when your fingers glow.
Oh, it's so much better.
From April 10, 1945 to July 18, 1947. Interestingly here, after this went on after the dropping of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. That's interesting. 1947, 18 people were injected with plutonium as part of the Manhattan Project. Doses administered range from 95 to 5,900 nanocuries. Albert Stevens, a man misdiagnosed with stomach cancer, received treatment for his cancer at the UC San Francisco Medical Center in 1945. Dr. Joseph Gilbert Hamilton, a Manhattan Project doctor in charge of the human experiments in California, had Stevens injected with plutonium-238 and plutonium-239 without informed consent. Stevens never had cancer. His surgery to remove cancerous cells was highly successful in removing the benign tumor. And he lived for another 20 years with the injected plutonium. Good for him. Since Stevens received the highly radioactive Pu-238, his accumulated dose over his remaining life was higher than anyone has ever received. 6,400 Rand. Neither Albert Stevens nor any of his relatives were told that he never had cancer. They were led to believe that the experimental treatment had worked. Oh, misdirection. His cremated remains were surreptitiously acquired by Argonne National Laboratory Center for Human Radiobiology in 1975 without the consent of surviving relatives. Some of the ashes were transferred to the National Human Radiobiology Tissue Repository at Washington State University, which keeps the remains of people who died with radioisotopes in their body. 3 patients at Billings Hospital at the University of Chicago were injected with plutonium. In 1946, 6 employees of a Chicago metallurgical lab were given water that was contaminated with plutonium-239 so that researchers could study how plutonium is absorbed into the digestive tract. An 18-year-old woman at an upstate New York hospital expecting to be treated for a pituitary gland disorder was injected instead with plutonium.
Yeah, you know, if you wanted to illuminate your room after you've been injected with plutonium, just paint your walls with phosphorus. Ooh. And that's all because you'd be the energy source. Experiments involving other radioactive materials. Immediately after World War II, researchers at Vanderbilt University gave 829 pregnant mothers in Tennessee what they were told were vitamin drinks that would improve the health of their babies. The lies just get me. The mixtures contained radioactive iron, and the researchers were determining how fast the radioisotope crossed into the placenta. 4 of the woman's babies died from cancers as a result of the experiments, and the women experienced rashes, bruises, anemia, hair and tooth loss, and cancer. From 1946 to 1953, at the Walter E. Fernald State School in Massachusetts, in an experiment sponsored by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and the Quaker Oats Corporation, 73 children were fed oatmeal containing radioactive calcium and other radioisotopes to track how nutrients were digested. The children were not told that they were being fed radioactive chemicals. They were told by the hospital staff and researchers that were joining a science club. The University of California Hospital in San Francisco exposed 29 patients, some with rheumatoid arthritis, to total body irradiation, 100 to 300 rad dose, to obtain data for the military. In 1950, researchers at the Medical College of Virginia performed experiments on severe burn victims, most of them poor and black, without their knowledge or consent, with funding from the Army and in collaboration with the AEC. In the experiments, the subjects were exposed to additional burning, experimental antibiotic treatment, and injections of radioactive isotopes. The amount of radioactive phosphorus-32 injected into some of the patients, 500 microcuries, sorry, that's from Madame Curie, that's the measurement, 500 microcuries, 19 mbq, was 50 times the acceptable dose for a healthy individual. For people with severe burns, this likely led to significantly increased death rates. Between 1948 and 1954, funded by the federal government, researchers at the Johns Hopkins Hospital inserted radium rods into the noses of 582 Baltimore, Maryland school children as an alternative to adenoidectomies. Similar experiments were performed on over 7,000 US Army and Navy personnel during World War II. Nasal radium irradiation became a standard medical treatment and was used in over 2.5 million Americans. Go ahead, Becky.
In another study at the Walter E. Fernald State School, in 1956, researchers gave mentally disabled children radioactive calcium orally and intravenously. They also injected radioactive chemicals into malnourished babies and then collected cerebrospinal fluid for analysis from their brains and spines. In 1961 and 1962, 10 Utah State prison inmates had blood samples taken which were mixed with radioactive chemicals and re-injected back into their bodies. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission funded the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to administer radium-224 and thorium-234 to 20 people between 1961 and 1965. Many were chosen from the H Center of New England and had volunteered for research projects on aging. Doses were 0.2 to 2.4 microcuries for radium and 1.2 to 120 microcuries for thorium. In a 1967 study that was published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, pregnant women were injected with radioactive cortisol to see if it would cross the placental barrier and affect the fetuses. And there's actually we've got the static image, photographic image of a report here. It's a study of a response of human beings accidentally exposed to significant radiation fallout. And yeah, that was what they called it. It's unclassified. Jesus Christ. And this was on natives of the Marshall Islands, by the way. In 1957, atmospheric nuclear explosions in Nevada, which were part of Operation Plum Bob, were later determined to have released enough radiation to have caused from 11,000 to 212,000 excess cases of thyroid cancer among U.S. citizens who were exposed to fallout from the explosions, leading to between 1,100 and 21,000 deaths. Early in the Cold War, in studies known as Project Gabriel and Project Sunshine, researchers in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia tried to determine how much nuclear fallout would be required to make the Earth uninhabitable. They realized that atmospheric nuclear testing had provided them an opportunity to investigate this. Such tests had dispersed radioactive contamination worldwide, and examination of human bodies could reveal how readily it was taken up, and hence how much damage it caused. Of particular interest was strontium-90 in the bones. Infants were the primary focus, as they would have had a full opportunity to absorb the new contaminants. As a result of this conclusion, researchers began a program to collect human bodies and bones from all over the world, with a particular focus on infants. The bones were cremated and the ashes analyzed for radioisotopes. This project was kept secret primarily because it would be a public relations disaster. As a result, parents and family were not told what was being done with the body parts of their relatives. These studies should not be confused with the baby tooth survey, which was undertaken during the same time period.
Wow, was that Tooth Fairy? Operation Tooth Fairy, maybe? Goodness, I would have called it that. I'm so shocked that no one was told. Could you imagine at the cremation of your young child, there's this like Men in Black dude at the back, and he just walks up and organises with the institution that's doing the cremation to I'll just have some of that, and here's the ashes you're going to give them, and we'll have all of those ashes. It's all good, right? Whatever. I'm mortified, Meccy, mortified that no one was told. That's the trust that I have in the government. It's amazing, isn't it, that I care that much to be mortified by it. You know, Meccy could slap me across the face and go, "You're an idiot." But feel free. No, I'm making a joke here. I am certainly not mortified. I've read the show notes, and I just have to come to acceptance. So any of those Men in Black dudes that come to my door and go, "You know what? We'll just take you now, right? We're just gonna incinerate you now, and we'll use your because I've got teeth growing in my lungs, so why not? Right? Who cares?" Irradiation experiments. Between 1960 and 1971, the Department of Defense funded non-consensual whole-body radiation experiments on mostly poor and black cancer patients who were not told what was being done to them. Patients were told that they were receiving a treatment that might cure their cancer, but the Pentagon was trying to determine the effects of high levels of radiation on the human body. One of the doctors involved in the experiments was worried about litigation by the patients. He referred to them only by their initials on the medical reports. He did this so that, in his words, there will be no means by which the patients can ever connect themselves up with the report to prevent either adverse publicity or litigation. Wow, that's the doctor saying that. Is crazy. From 1960 to 1971, Dr. Eugene Sanger, funded by the Defense Atomic Support Agency, performed whole-body radiation experiments on more than 90 poor black advanced stage cancer patients with inoperable tumors at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center during the Cincinnati radiation experiments. He forged consent forms and did not inform the patients of the risks of irradiation. The patients were given 100 or more rads of whole body radiation, which in many cases caused intense pain and vomiting. Critics have questioned the medical rationale for this study and contend that the main purpose of the research was to study the acute effects of radiation exposure. In 1963 to 1973, 10 years, a whole decade, a leading endocrinologist, Dr. Carl Heller, irradiated the testicles of Oregon and Washington prisoners. In return for their participation, he gave them $5 a month and $100 when they had to receive a vasectomy upon the conclusion of the trial. The surgeon who sterilized the men said that it was necessary to keep from contaminating the general population with radiation-induced mutants.
Oh my God.
Dr. Joseph Hamilton, one of the researchers who had worked with Heller on the experiments, said that the experiments, quote, had a little of the Buchenwald touch. In 1963, University of Washington researchers irradiated the testicles of 232 prisoners to determine the effects of radiation on testicular function. When these inmates later left prison and had children, at least 4 of them had offspring born with birth defects. The exact number is unknown because researchers never followed up on the status of the subjects.
if you let someone run free and let them do whatever they want, this is what you get. I think we can do the chemical experiments and
Your time starts.
consensual tests. From 1942 to 1944, the U.S. Chemical Warfare Service conducted experiments which exposed thousands of U.S. military personnel to mustard gas in order to test the effectiveness of gas masks and protective clothing. From 1950 through 1953, the U.S. Army conducted Operational LAC, Large Area Coverage, LAC, spraying chemicals over 6 cities in the United States and Canada to test dispersal patterns of chemical weapons. Army records stated that the chemicals which were sprayed on the city of Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, included zinc cadmium sulfide, which was not thought to be harmful. A 1997 study by the U.S. National Research Council found that it was sprayed at levels so low as not to be harmful. It said that people were normally exposed to high levels in urban environments. To test whether or not sulfuric acid, which is used in making molasses, was harmful as a food additive, the Louisiana State Board of Health commissioned a study to feed Negro prisoners nothing but molasses for 5 weeks. One report stated that prisoners didn't object to submitting themselves to the test because it would not do any good if they did. In 1953 article in the Medical Scientific Journal, Clinical Science, described a medical experiment in which researchers intentionally blistered the skin on the abdomens of 41 children who ranged in age from 8 to 14 using cantharide. The study was performed to determine how severely the substance injures or irritates the skin of children. After the studies, the children's skin was removed with scissors and swabbed with peroxide.
Good grief.
I mean, we go on about what the Nazis did and how terrible they were and all the experiments they conducted, and they were. And it was monstrous. But
I mean, they set a bar.
But the thing is this. Are we I mean, they were all doing it. And in fact, considering Operation Paperclip, it might have been the very same Nazi scientists that
Exactly
did this.
right.
I mean, people always say that the United States won World War II. And for all intents and purposes, that seems to be true.
On paper. Yep.
There were thousands, if not, in fact, probably tens of thousands of high-ranking, middle-ranking Nazi scientists, engineers, soldiers, functionaries, spies, etc., brought across to the United States or under the umbrella of the United States, still in Europe, to work for the United States in what is called, of course, as you all know, Operation Paperclip. And the Russians did the same, except they didn't call it anything. They just did that. They just brought in thousands of Nazis over to help them run their systems and programs, which gave them the edge in the space race, by the way. So you can argue that the Russians probably got the better space scientists. But really, those people were taken over and taken on because the truth is that the Germans were very advanced in many fields at the time, right? They had advanced weapons research, scientific research, rocketry, ballistics, like anything you can imagine. The Germans were very advanced. That's a fact.
Jet engines, aircraft
everything.
design.
Yeah, 100%. Now, if I were an American or a Russian high-ranking officer or decision maker at the time, I would probably also take those people on board to get that
There's
knowledge.
music.
That's early. All right.
So this is the end of another Shiny Side Out with David Mackey. You can catch us at 7 a.m. Eastern American Standard Time for Plato's Cave, where we'll wake you up at 7 a.m. with another dose of David Mackey, but in Plato's Cave style. And what advice do we provide, everybody? To Be safe. That's what it is. Catch you next week.